I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that change lives forever. This is the Life Shift podcast, and what we're trying to do here is a live stream of a bonus episode, which kind of stemmed from having conversations with a lot of the people that I've recorded with so far. So we're about 2 months into the release of the Life Shift podcast. And so 11 episodes have come out already. I've recorded 22 episodes, and I have like a handful more scheduled to go or pending scheduled to go. So there's a lot happening. But what I'm really enjoying is that after these conversations, people are coming back and asking me or telling me like reflections that they had as a guest on the show through their conversation, sharing their story. Or I'm getting messages from other people about how a certain story resonated with them, even though the actual situation was not exactly the same way. And so because of that, I was like, well, what if we try, which emphasis on the try here with the live stream, of a bonus episode with some of the people that have been guests on the show that wanted to share something. So tonight, I've come here with my friend Adrienne, my friend Christin, and my friend Marty, who decided to rejoin us.
Yay, Marty's
thankfully.
back.
Welcome back, Marty.
I'm on a different technology, but we're here.
So we're here, and that's what's important. So we don't really have a strict format, and I hope you're okay with that. And side note, when you're listening to these episodes, we really went into these conversations without a strict outline. We really wanted to see where the conversations would go. And it's funny enough, sometimes the guest will be talking. So like Adrienne will be talking, and then the guest will be talking, and I'll think of a question, and then they'll keep talking and I'll forget that question. And part of it is great because I've been able to release that, right? And I've been able to go, clearly it wasn't as important as it needed to be at that time, and let me ask the next question that comes to mind. So I really appreciate that. So before we start really the conversation, I just want maybe Adrienne, you can go first and just kind of say hi and then just remind us a little bit about what your story was about.
Sure. Well, hello, I'm Adrienne. I believe I was episode 4, and my episode was the one about curing PTSD with psilocybin-bearing mushrooms.
To that, I know when we talked a little bit before you started recording, you were apprehensive a little bit about sharing your story. And behind the scenes, I can't tell you how many people reached out to me asking me for more information or feeling really connected to your story. So I think your story really helped a lot of people. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Christin, do you want to just say hello and remind us of kind of your life shift?
No.
Okay.
Of course. So sorry, Adrienne. Yeah, so I'm Christin. I was episode 1, and my story was about how my then fiance and I had moved out to Louisiana planning one life shift, and instead a whole bunch of other life shifts happened in the terms of my entire family dying in about 18 months and us getting married and having a baby all within that time. Kind of the craziness that ensued after the fact and how we're much better for it now.
Yeah, and really learn from it. And I know you laugh at this when you hear these episodes, but because Christin was one of the first that I recorded with, I often quoted things that she said because they were the first, like, most impactful things that I had heard. And so a lot of you will hear me talk about this radical acceptance that you talked about that really stuck with me.
I
which is
text you
cool
every time. I'm
Yeah.
like, Matt, you're quoting me again.
Yeah. But you know what? It was helpful for me to put words to how I feel about my own life shift or the life shifts that I've gone through and kind of the aftermath of them. So I I think that's why it stuck with me, which was really cool. And then Marty, you want to say hello and share a little bit about your life shift?
Sure. Well, hi, I was Marty, and
You
I
were.
am Marty, and my episode was
You're
episode
still
8.
Marty.
Still Marty, and just a few weeks ago, so a little bit more recent, maybe if you've listened to all of them. And so my life shift took place a long time ago, actually, when I was 13 years old, when I lost my mom. So my story was about that before, during, and after. And Matt, your episode had not yet come out, and so it was a little bit of a precursor or a totally different example of losing a parent at a young age that then you picked up later and told your story, which was similar, but as we learned, very different. So pass it back to you.
Yeah, yours was so interesting to me. We've been friends for years now, and we both kind of connected in the fact that we had deceased mothers when we were younger. And I know we had conversations here and there, so I knew a little bit about the story. And I guess ignorance on my part, because my life shifts, if you haven't listened to my episode now, when I was 8, my mom died. And then I had to move to a new state, start a new school, move in with the parent that I didn't originally live with. All these things happened. And so when I was talking to Marty and he was telling his story about, his family life and the things that he did before his mother died, and then the things that he did after his mother died, part of me was like, wait, I thought our experiences were supposed to be the same. And they were so wildly different. But what's interesting about your story, Marty, is that I really like it. It made you make sense more so to me now. I don't know if that sounds weird, but I think the person you are, it feels like it all makes sense now of the way you were raised and then how that happened and how you reacted to that. It made me understand you more.
It was thank you. I agree. And you too. And I will say that one thing I learned listening to yours was that one might think that someone who has lost a parent at a young age has gone through the same experience. And I kind of wondered, especially listening back to my episode, how I came across or actually second guess some of my own behaviors. But your episode made me almost like a light bulb went off that yes, both of our moms died around the same time, but there's so many other circumstances that were different between us. And I think that goes for Adrienne and Christin and every other guest, that
Right.
we might have been talking about one particular thing, but that's only one little lens in a bigger picture of other things that were happening in our lives. And certainly for you and me, Matt, we're so wildly different and might help explain why we reacted so differently to a very similar circumstance.
Yeah. Would you agree? I mean, Kristen, your story was really losing your a grandparent, then a parent, then a grandparent, then a parent. And then meanwhile getting married, having a child, living in the most rural of rural places in Louisiana. When you listened to Marty's episode or my episode, did you find similarities in either one of those for your story?
So, I mean, when it's I'm going to say funny only because I can't think of a better word. Matt, you and I have known each other for like 15 years now, and I knew your story. Like I knew you when you were going to the Josh Groban concert with your grandma. I knew you when she passed. I hadn't heard your story about your mom. And then whenever we recorded your episode, I could not stop crying. And
We heard that.
Yeah, everyone heard it. Everyone saw it. It got to my core. And the same with hearing Marty's story and hearing Adrienne's story. And I even told you in your episode, it's why this whole project is so meaningful and I think so important for all of your listeners is I absolutely can connect with each and every one of you on your pain, the amount of just like suffering and turmoil, and then that human reaction to survive and create resilience, and that that grit, that gumption of like, I am hurting and that is part of me, but that's not all of me. Like, yes, I tap into it so strong and so hard, and I feel like even now, even more so as a parent, because I have both sides of that. I have that
Mm-hmm.
child perspective and the parent perspective. I get so much out of hearing every single person's story, and I have to listen to the podcast without my kids, because otherwise Oliver's like, "Mommy, why are you crying? Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine, baby. It's just so moving." He's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go watch Paw Patrol now."
Right.
I'm like, "It's okay. Mom is fine."
I wrote down a few notes so that I wouldn't forget after Matt's comment at the beginning, right? So,
I've already forgotten a few
right,
things.
right. But I think it's really important to hear these stories because it helps us to understand that like everybody has trauma, right? Our trauma makes us who we are,
Mm-hmm.
it shapes us, especially the things that happen to us in our childhood that shape us the most, but into an adulthood too. And so, even though our stories of like strife and loss and grief might all be different, but the
Mm-hmm.
nervous system reacts to those things in a very similar way. And I think that's where the commonalities are in realizing that we all have to learn how to process what's happening in our bodies, and we have to learn how to do it in a healthy way. Not only that, but when you understand that everybody has trauma and you start to understand what other people's trauma is, you can understand them better as a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
You meet somebody and you're like, why
Yeah.
are they the way that they are? Why can't they be XYZ, right? But we say that when we
Yeah.
don't think what caused them to be that way, what things happened in their lives that, that made them have those reactions and turn into the human that they are.
Yeah. And I think your story, Adrienne, was something that people needed to hear, not so much in the way that you went about necessarily curing or helping your PTSD, but rather the fact that there was a particular rock bottom for you and you understood what it was and how it was affecting you, and that you had the ability or the wherewithal to move through that and find something that worked for you. Because I think in all these conversations we find that what works for someone else doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for, like Marty and I, our stories are vastly different. And the way we approach grief was, I would venture to say, like on the opposite side of the spectrum. And that's totally fine because that's how we needed to move through it. The way you approached your PTSD was your story. But I think the part of your story that really resonated with people was the fact that there was that moment that you knew it was time and you were ready to take that step to kind of help yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another thing that's important too is that most people, when they experience, a significant trauma in their life, have an element of grief. You don't have to lose somebody
Mm-hmm.
close to you to have grief.
Right.
Grief is the loss of anything that you're not going to get back.
Mm-hmm.
It can be something that was a part of your life. It could be a person that was a part of your life. You can grieve for the childhood that you should have had your parents been more emotionally attuned to you. And that's a grieving process too. And I think that,
Yeah.
when we all understand that there's an element of grief inside of us that needs to be processed, that's where we can find the commonalities.
Yeah.
So
Marty,
if
go
I
ahead.
may jump in, these aren't subjects that are normally cocktail party subjects. We don't often get a chance to
Unless you're
talk
me.
about them, or maybe, or maybe, or maybe choose not to,
Right.
or we're never asked about them, or we gloss over them in a couple sentences and
Mm-hmm.
move on. And so that's one of the real values of this platform, of this podcast, is to really dive in. And like Adrienne said, they're not all about grief. In fact, if I'm being honest, I have a confession here. I wasn't planning to listen to all of these. when I agreed to record, it was to help you out,
Right.
Matt, because we know each other. And frankly, I thought it was going to be a grief podcast of everybody's lost somebody, and that's what it's about. And so then the first one was released, Kristin's, and I listened because it was the first one that came out. And I, like Kristin said, that kids can't be around. I mean, I listened to it just on my own, and I loved it because I connected with it, even though I might not be able to exactly identify with everything that happens with each of your guests. I have now listened to everyone and will continue to listen because a kind of a miraculous thing happened. I'm finding value in every person's episode because these are subjects that aren't often illuminated, and maybe they should be, or should be more often.
Yeah. And I think after we recorded your episode, Marty, I remember you distinctly saying, well, I don't remember distinctly because I can't remember the quote, but you said something to the effect of, I'm open to talking about this, but people don't ask.
Yeah.
And, or if they do, they just want a cursory response.
And I said that on my episode at the end. I said, this often isn't something that people want to talk about. Even if they know, or if I've mentioned in passing that my mom died when I was young, they never go back to that subject and say, tell me what happened. Tell me everything. Of course not. I understand that. But after the episode came out, I had a friend of mine text me and say, so I just listened, and I got to say, I'm one of those people. And I'm sorry I never really asked more about that. And next time we get together, if you'd like to, I'd like to hear more about it. So that's true. And I don't blame them, but no. it's true.
I think it's uncomfortable. And it kind of goes to a little bit of my story. When my mom passed, Kristin and I talked about how my father did what he knew best to do. And at the time was the late 80s, early 90s. People weren't talking about sad things. It wasn't something that like, okay, we process this now. We push it down. It's not appropriate. Everyone should be happy kind of thing. And I think if something like this was around when my mom died, how I was, I feel like so many years of my life would have been quite different because I would have been able to take that moment to go, okay, it's okay to be where I am now and not put on some kind of facade or, a mask, if you will, for 20 years or so of that. And so I think it's important that we have these conversations, not necessarily the kids that have parents that have passed are going to listen to this episode, but just the fact that we're talking about it and it's out in the open and it's something that is here and available, I think is a good thing. And selfishly, this podcast has helped me so much, just listening to these stories and understanding that, like Adrienne said, everyone has similar reactions or, like actual, what'd you say, biological reactions of some sort.
Yeah, in the nervous system, your body reacts.
Yeah, the nervous system. Right. And so we're all human. And that's it's cool to hear these stories and people talking about moments that have changed their lives. And I know, Adrienne, you specifically kind of gravitate towards the stories on the podcast that talk about the growth after and the changes. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of what draws you to that.
I think for me, what draws me to it is that I've always been interested in and driven to pursue my own personal growth. I think that it makes me a better person. And I feel like it can make anybody a better person to try to be better than you were yesterday. That's my mantra. I don't have to be I don't have to be the best. I just have to be better than I was yesterday. And so, pursuing this growth and this improvement of myself, I think I like to see that in other people, because I know that when we're all striving to be a little better than we were yesterday, that it makes us better as a community. Right.
Right.
And so it's just, it makes me happy to see that people are improving themselves. And I think that's why I gravitate toward it, because like it gives me these like warm, tingly feelings inside, you know?
It does. And it's nice to know. I mean, one of the common things that people have said in these episodes, I don't know if you've kind of caught on to it, and maybe I forced them into saying it, to be fair, is so many of these people, especially the people that have stories that are maybe more on the sad side, so many of us, I'm going to include myself, are grateful having gone through those experiences for the person that I am today or the people that they are today. Because those challenges create new versions of us, right? And different trajectories of kind of the people that we would be. I know for a fact that if my mom had not died, I would not be anyone near who I am right now, just based on what my life was like beforehand to what my life was the day after.
Have you thought, Matt, how you would be different?
Yes. I mean, part of it, I would not be as driven in school for sure, because before my mom died, I didn't care about those things. Like, I was probably smart enough. I was reading at a higher level and those kind of things. I didn't care about grades. I didn't approach things in that way. It was just kind of get through things. And I know that my mom didn't really care. I mean, she wanted me to do well, obviously, but she didn't care about anything. But what happened is when my mom died, I put that pressure on myself to be perfect in whatever capacity there was. Because in my 8-year-old brain that ruled me until I was like 30, I thought, if I screw up, I'm going to be left alone. Someone else is going to leave me. So I have to prove my worth. And I also have to prove that I'm going to be okay to everyone. Not that anyone put that pressure on me, but that's what that 8-year-old felt like, is like abandonment is, I'm on the precipice of abandonment. And so I have to be perfect. So I think my life would be wildly different.
That's trauma.
I don't know
That's a
what.
trauma response that a lot of people have, you know, the striving
Right.
for perfectionism because we're afraid that for some reason people won't like us because the traumas that we experienced in our childhood hurt our self-esteem. I mean, I was in that same place too. Like, you know, I was a
Right.
perfectionist for a long time and it was slowly destroying me.
Right. Right. And we don't know any better, especially as a young child, with people around us that are not prepared for changing or helping, face that or realize that you don't have to do it. Even to this day, and all of you can attest to that, I struggle with being confident in the work that I produce, that it's not good enough. I don't know if I would have been that way had my mom not died, and be forced into a whole new world. So, Marty, I don't know who I would be, but I don't think I would be. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think I've done well for myself, and I think I've created a person in myself that I'm proud of.
I mean, yeah, I was just going to say it's better on this side than the other side. You're propelling yourself towards perfection or towards positivity.
But is it?
As opposed to not caring at all and just pushing everything away and just, I don't care what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I was 8, so I don't know, like it's that sliding doors movie, right? Like, it would be so interesting if we could see that multiverse of the different versions of us had we chosen or had circumstances not happened
But is it really? Would you really want to know all of the different outcomes? Like, wouldn't that test your sanity a little bit?
No, but yes. It would be interesting.
Tell yourself that they exist. I believe in the multiverse, and some different version of me out there exists, and I don't need to know about it.
Christin, you talked a lot about therapy. You talked a lot about mental health and the importance of mental health, and therapy in the sense of go to therapy whether you think you need it or not, because it's always valuable. Would you say what would you say, like, do you feel like that's like your mantra, or do you think that came out in the recording?
An easy thing to say is, yeah, I think therapy is for everyone at any time of your life, and then it's beneficial to anyone. Go and you will get something out of it, period. But part of the reason I am such a cheerleader for therapy is because we don't have these conversations on a day-to-day basis, just like Marty and Adrienne were talking about. I think that if we normalized having these conversations, if these conversations did happen at a cocktail hour or on the lunch break at work, or when you're chit-chatting with friends and you say, "How are you?" and you don't just say fine, you say, "Actually, I've been really thinking about my mom lately, and it's like
Why are we
driving me
so
crazy."
afraid?
Because
We don't want to make
it's
people
like
uncomfortable.
we don't want to make people uncomfortable. And it's like what I was saying in my podcast, I don't like icky feelings that make me feel
Mm-hmm.
icky. And the sad makes me feel icky, and it makes me feel weak, and it makes me feel distracted. And so I avoid them. And I think a lot of people are that way.
But you don't, because you're
So,
listening to these podcast episodes
well,
and you're,
I've gotten better at it. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a practice, but I've learned that by going to therapy. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think therapy is great. I think therapy is for everyone. And if you're too scared to go to therapy, then talk to a friend, then write a journal, start small. You know,
Come on the Life
before
Shift
I was
podcast.
come on the left life. Well, and Matt, I was even going to say though that because you had
I'm not a
when we were
licensed
doing like our
psychologist.
Fake it till you
no,
make
God,
it.
no, but no, but before when we were kind of like warming up and figuring out if my computer was going to die before we started recording, you had asked, I forget what you asked, but you had asked something. And the response that I thought of in my brain to whatever the question was that I can't remember now was what made recording my episode so meaningful to me was just as simple as making the time to talk about it. I am going to spend this time talking about this monumental time in my life where everything went awry and unexpected things happened. Just having that time. And for me, that's what therapy is about. It's about making the time. When my husband and I started going to therapy, you know, there were sessions where it was like we have to figure something out. You know, it was an argument that was happening that we were trying to figure out, or something we were trying to resolve. But then it started becoming just that we were dedicating that time to each other. It was as beneficial as a date night. It was saying we are dedicating this time to each other, to our marriage, to our relationship. And that is what's so beneficial about doing this with you, is just saying, I'm going to dedicate this hour where I'm just going to talk about this thing and really kind of dig into it and analyze my own feelings and talk about what I learned from it and talk about what was hard about it. And then being able to go back and listen to it and being like, oh man, I went through some shit and I learned some stuff. Like, you feel proud of yourself whenever you repeat it back, whenever you hear it in your own head, it's one thing, but whenever you actually listen back to it, it's so much more meaningful. Maybe that's just me. But I wholeheartedly believe in therapy, believe in do this podcast and talk about the scary, weird, crappy stuff with your
Icky.
friends. The icky
Talk about the
stuff.
icky things. Yeah.
Let's talk about the icky things.
Matt, you've said, I don't remember in what format, over the last couple of weeks or maybe this week since your episode came out, which was something that I experienced having recorded one as well, which is you've shared bits and pieces many different times, but saying it all in the scope of an hour
Mm-hmm.
almost makes you like a third party observer,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not it's right after you record it or listening back to it. You're listening to it like, oh, that's me. And you have a different perspective from just living your life day to day, having dedicated that time to telling the story beginning to end, and then thinking about that subject. And I'll just give you some credit, Matt, here publicly, in that your active listening skills and your follow-up questions, the reflection of after the here's what happened, is excellent.
Thank you.
Not just for the,
I agree.
it's excellent to hear as a third party listener to other stories,
But when you're in it,
but it's
Yeah.
especially good also for the person who's never thought about it that way. And, you know, a couple of things that you asked me, and I think the same thing. When you're doing that, you're definitely taking any outline that might exist and throwing it out the window, and just listening carefully and asking appropriate and meaningful follow-up questions. And that's what's kept me as a listener as opposed to just a participant one time.
I've noticed that as well. And Matt is also very good at mirroring too. So when somebody says, you know, what they're feeling or what they went through, he repeats it back to them in a summarized version to make sure that they know that he understands what they've said.
I try, you know, honestly,
you're doing
that
a
was
great
Yeah.
job. You're
Thank
doing a
you.
great job. You really
Again,
are.
selfishly, I appreciate these conversations because it allows me to practice active listening and being confident enough to throw away a question that was there at one point and letting it go and carrying the conversation wherever my guest kind of wants to take it. And if it's going off the rails, then I can bring it back because I know the direction they originally wanted to go. So if anyone listening, if anyone's here live, I know we have a few people watching live, which is super cool. Just so you know, I just get maybe like a sentence or two of what someone's story is on as a guest because I don't want to know too much, which I guess is against kind of podcasting rules. You should really do your research and whatnot. But I find it super helpful.
You don't need rules,
but
Matt. There's
You want to ask the genuine, curious questions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You want to be in a personal conversation with them. Plus, and coming from on the guest's side of things, if the guest prepares too much and knows exactly what you're going to ask and is basically reading from a script, it completely kills the intimacy of the conversation.
There's a certain authenticity, I think, that it would lack if both people know too much about what they're getting into.
I mean, what you're doing, Matt, is you're documenting those difficult conversations that should be happening in our day-to-day lives. Whenever you are meeting with a friend for lunch and you ask, how are you? And they say fine. And then just like digging in and be like, well, how are you really? You know, I know you have a lot that's going on in your life. How's it going? Like, you are having those conversations and you're documenting them, and it's so important and it's so meaningful. And yeah, it should be a little awkward and it should be a little weird and it should be a little uncomfortable, and that is why it's so meaningful. It's because it's awkward and weird and uncomfortable, and because we're not practicing it, and we should be.
Right. Well, yeah. What if someone came on and they were like, I don't know, I'm fine.
Did they really have a life shift?
I hope that never happens.
How fine we are. Right.
You know, and that's so crazy. Here's a question that I thought of when both Christin and Marty were talking about, and I actually remembered it this time. Do the three of you, any of you, have anything you regret saying in your story that you shared?
So, I went back and listened to it. You know, like Christin and Marty have mentioned, and I wasn't planning on re-listening to mine because I think that I sound a little funny when I listen to recordings of my own voice. But I listened to it. Nobody likes the sound of their own voice. It's weird because you know you speak and you hear it in your head, and then you hear it coming back from a speaker, and it's two different things. So I went back and listened to it because I, you know, was curious to see like how my story would have come out to, you know, to other people, and I wanted to listen to it as a third party observer. And I was like, you know what, this was all right. Like I didn't feel like I had any regrets about anything that I talked about, and it felt really good to tell the story. And it also allowed me to realize too that as I was revisiting it, like how far I've come, because there was a time in my life when I couldn't talk about any of my traumas without breaking down and reliving them, because that's what PTSD is. And when you have healed yourself, talking about those things becomes safe, and you no longer feel reactive doing it. It feels like something that happened to somebody else and you're just telling a story about it. And I feel like that was the benefit that I got from re-listening to it. And I I didn't feel bad about anything that I talked about.
Good. And before Kristen and Marty, before you add anything, I just want anyone listening to know that these stories are very minimally edited, and these three can probably attest to that. I don't want to change their story, so I don't move things around. I just take out our random ums and likes and things like
You
that.
took out the one time that I sounded like I was laughing like from inside out of the microphone. I got too close and it was bad.
There's a few things that I take out, but yeah, no, the story is, I don't want to modify your story. That's your story, and I'm just here to help you share it, hopefully in a way that you want to share it. So anyway, did you say anything that you regret saying, Marty?
No, I barely misspoke on a couple very minor things that it's boring. I won't even go into here, but basically content, like real content wise, no, I don't regret anything. I will say that before I recorded with you, I didn't know for sure if I was going to share it into my own circle, my friends and family especially. And I didn't want to make that decision until after I listened to it back, which was actually like 5 or 6 weeks later. And by then I had kind of forgotten what I said exactly. And so listening to it back actually was beneficial because I got to listen to it separately and just listen in and I was putting myself in the shoes. What if I knew myself? What would my reaction be? And I didn't, after listening back, maybe this is a testament to, again, what I said earlier about your active listening skills or pulling out exactly some good reflection. I knew I immediately wanted to share it because a part of me maybe was like holding on to this sensitive subject and like a pearl and not immediately wanting to blast it out everywhere. And I was proud of how it came out, actually, how the episode went, and in thanks to you, and then I'm glad that I shared it because I shared it on my own social media, and not knowing exactly who. Sometimes we forget who all is out there on our social media. And I heard back from some unusual places that listened to it and got something from it. So that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, and you know what? It helps a lot, obviously, just on the side of someone putting a podcast out there when there are 2 bazillion podcasts out there. If anyone can share this, anyone listening, even if you're not a guest, to share the episode and get more ears on it, I would super appreciate it. My original goal was really that the right episode found the ears that needed to hear it at the time. And I think we've accomplished that in at least the first 11. So that's helpful.
I think with each episode that comes out, that person, first, they're telling a different story. I'm really happy with how different everybody's stories are, but we can yet all find a piece that we can identify with. But more than that, like I said, I shared it on my social media when my selfish episode came out. But that means that anybody who happens to know Marty might have had a PTSD situation or might have had multiple family members die at this time. They might look back at the episodes and go, I want to listen to that one. I want to listen to that one. And every week that goes on, that you'll find more people will discover the catalog, if you will, and it will continue. It's the gift that keeps on giving for everybody.
One of the things that Marty just said, I think that resonated with me was the idea of sharing the episodes after they were recorded, right? Because recording the episode is an act of vulnerability, and then sharing it with your friends, all of them on your social media, is a huge act of vulnerability because not all of those people know about the traumas that you've gone through, and so it's like, here I am putting myself out there, and it's like, do I share it with them? Do I, for me, there was a, like we talked about, Matt, some of my hesitation was like, are people going to judge me because of how I chose to deal with my trauma? Right. And then at some point I was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to put it out there. This is part of who I am. If people don't accept that this is part of my life, then maybe they're not part of my tribe. And so I put it out there, and I got some surprising responses back from friends that I was not expecting. Like, I really didn't think that people would listen to it, and some of them actually did.
Yeah. But to your point earlier too, you said that understanding people's stories and their traumas and the things that have have shaped the person that they are, help to explain why we are the way we are at that current moment. So I'm sure that sharing your story also help people understand you better and be able to communicate with you in different ways that they weren't able to before. I hope.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. How about you, Christin? Go ahead, Marty. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to follow up and ask Adrienne and Christin if you had any surprising or unusual reactions afterwards. That's all.
Nobody unfriended me when they found out that I had used a substance that was, technically not legal in all 50 states.
I would have guessed the opposite, Adrienne. People asking
I did, yeah,
for information on that.
That
I'm
was
sure
the
she got
reaction.
that
I
too.
did have a lot of people asking me, like, how did that work for you? And like, how was that process? And there were a lot of the people that were asking were people that had their own levels of, complex PTSD to some extent, or like severe unresolved trauma that they felt like, therapy wasn't enough. And so I did have some people asking me some questions. So that was, I had more interest than I thought I would get out of it. So that was a surprise to me.
Well, and your story was so interesting, Adrienne, because it was like the universe was like, here's your platter, like,
right.
And here it is again. Here's your second platter. It was so fascinating.
Really was. It was like
to listen
this
to.
Overwhelming desire to seek the answer.
It unfolded
just showed
to
up,
you.
And then everything just came into my path. Like first, it came into my awareness, and then the gift was delivered to me on a silver platter twice. I was like, I guess this. I guess I'm made of magic. This is the way my life works now.
But here's the thing that might be helpful for people listening is that had you not been ready, that could have been presented to you and you may have turned it down, right? And so it's the act of understanding where your self-awareness and where you are at that moment and whether or not that's right for you at that moment. So I think it's cool. All right, Christin, we put you off long enough. Go ahead. And then I'll tell you what I regret saying. What do you regret saying? Anything?
No, nothing. No, but Marty said something about like listening back to it and like noticing inconsistencies. And it just reminded me of when I was listening back to my episode, I also noticed inconsistencies, and it highlighted to me how traumatic that time really was, that when I was in the middle of telling the story, I got like who died first wrong. Like I think I said my grandfather died first, and then my mom. No, my mom died first. My grandfather actually died the Friday before our Sunday wedding. So my grandpa died. A whole bunch of people came into town for his funeral, and then we were having a wedding that we had not invited a bunch of family to. It was like a very small wedding, so they were all in town for the funeral, and they're like, "And you're getting married tomorrow," and we're like, and you're still not invited. So it was, for me, it was like, I know we're terrible people. And stressful, and so like listening back to it, I was like, man, it was so traumatic that even when I retell the story now, I still don't remember the details accurately, so that was eye-opening for me. I don't regret a single thing I said, even getting things wrong, because that's what trauma does, right? And in terms of like reactions, I mean, I have been very open about our therapy journey and that therapy is for everyone. So I think the podcast coming out no one reached out specifically for my episode, but I have had a few people reach out and ask me for like therapist recommendations, or saying like, hey, I think my husband and I are ready to start seeing a marriage counselor. How would we even go about doing that? There's so much like, just especially where we are, this shroud, this secrecy about what it is to find a therapist, find a counselor, and
right.
there's so
Must
much
mean
shame.
something's wrong.
Yeah, there's so much shame and judgment around it, and it makes me feel so bad because I'm like,
Right.
why we need to talk about it to everyone all the time. I want to wave, I want a therapy flag, like I want a rainbow flag and a trans colors flag and a therapy flag. We need a
Right.
color. I don't know
Right.
what color it's going to be. I'm going to design it. There might be sparkly stars. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to fly it from all my cars.
Right.
Yeah. I don't
But
even
you
know where
open
I'm
the
going
door
with
for
that, but
them. You open the door for people that were like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll ask someone that had some success doing it or
yes.
feels confident in it. And part of your episode, you talked about like, or we both talked about how when you start therapy, it's going to take a little bit to find the right fit, right? You're not
Mhm.
every therapist is not the same. It took me like
Right.
5-6 people until I found the one that like
It's
actually
yeah.
kicked me into gear.
Well, it's
So,
finding the right therapist, but it's also when you start therapy, you don't know what it is you need to talk about. Like you go in with an idea of what you think your shit is. That's not
mhm.
it. That's just what you think it
Oh
is.
yeah, for
Once you
sure.
get into it, then you figure out what it is. And then you're like, "Oh
Yeah.
god, this goes so much deeper than I thought it was." So, there's a settling in
Uh-huh.
phase, you got to you
Yeah.
got to dig, and that's scary, That it just is, but that's okay.
Yeah. When I did therapy, I think what initially helped me finally get over, I say get over, but finally grieve my mom for that final piece was my therapist that I finally found. She was the opposite of me in every way. And she helped me realize that my entire life after my mom died, the decisions that I was making were coming from the 8-year-old version of me, that in that protective, like, I don't want to be abandoned again in the capacity. And so even as a 30-year-old, all the decisions I was making were that 8-year-old version of Matt or Matthew at the time, right? And so that it took 6 people to get to that, like you just said, Kristen, that buried deep concept that I just hadn't understood. So for me, I do regret this, and I just talked about it with Marty on a text, I think, because he brought it up, and I don't know if it was a trigger for him or if it was just me being terrible. But on my episode, I referred back to Marty's episode where we talked about, because like I said when I first started, is that we both have what seemingly were the same thing, right? Like we both lost our mom as young children. And in my conversation with Kristen in my episode, I say something to the effect, and it didn't come out right, and I apologize, Marty, but I said, and Marty, the only thing that happened to Marty was that his mom died. And then I was like, I didn't mean it like that, but I also regret saying it in that way. And we've had this conversation via text that we kind of
There's no need to
figured it out, but
apologize.
I
But
do regret
also in
saying
my
that.
episode, you said to me, it's almost like a luxury. But you caught it right away. You said, I don't mean it was a luxury. I just, you know what I mean. But all kidding aside, that was a super important distinction to be made. And by the way, I take no offense to that. Really important distinction to make is that when I lost my mom, I stayed in my same school, in my same home with my same dad and my same friends. And so the only thing that changed was continuing on without my mom. And by the way, I said this in my episode, there is a difference between 13 years old when that happened to me and 8 years old when it happened to you. And everything else changed in your life, moving states. And I had and have so many follow-up questions about that. If your dad hadn't moved 6 months before, what would have happened?
Yeah.
And then how did he
Right.
adjust to you moving all of a sudden in with him? Like so much, not just in your 8-year-old head, but everyone around you, so much changed for you. So I don't blame you for having that thought listening to my story, but actually what you said helped me too, because I was a little hard on myself after we recorded my episode with, gosh, it seemed like I didn't really grieve properly, or I wasn't acting as I think I should have now looking back as a 40-year-old man. And listening more to the whole circumstances behind it, I almost forgave myself a little bit more for that, because I did have it different, in a good way, that at least I had so many pieces of my life to hold on to that were consistent and I could fall back on. And you didn't have that luxury. It really was in that circumstance.
I have so much to add to this. Brene Brown and Nicole LePera, the holistic psychologist, and so many people, they talk about you cannot compare trauma. You cannot compare the shit you go through, because someone's capital T trauma is not someone else's
Right, but that's your
lowercase
logical
t trauma.
brain.
Yeah.
Your logical brain, you tell that you can't compare them.
I
But
shouldn't
when you live
Yeah.
the life of a 13-year-old losing his mom or an 8-year-old, you think that that's just how everyone went. And so I kept those parts in both episodes on purpose, because I want these
Yes.
conversations to be authentic. But I also want, now we're recording this for my public apology to Marty, because I didn't mean it the way it sounded. And I know that you know that.
Yeah, I didn't take it that way in either time. It was,
Yeah.
this was,
but you pointed it out.
I pointed it out.
I'm kidding.
I pointed it out because I
we're
wanted
human.
to draw the whole perspective for somebody else listening. I truly I didn't even remember that you said that. It didn't bother me one bit at the time. It was really just a comparative statement, and I took it as such. Again, this is not a sensitive subject to me at this stage. Maybe it would have been if we recorded this 20 years ago. But it's just part of all of us. It's part of our life story. And if we're at a point that we can talk about it and publish it, we must be comfortable talking about it. So any angle that takes is an okay and appropriate angle, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you accepting my apology. Go ahead, Christin.
What I appreciate about it, though, Matt, is that when I say we're not supposed to compare trauma, it's a recognition that we do
Yes,
compare.
we do.
Brené's Atlas of the Heart, she talks about you can't avoid comparison.
You're speaking Adrienne's love language.
I just finished reading that book. It was so good.
Sorry. It's so good. It's so good. You can't avoid it. Right. You can't stop it. It's an inherent, we do that as humans, but it's what you choose to do. It's recognizing the comparison and what you choose to do after the comparison. And so I'm glad you kept those things in Marty's podcast episode and yours, because it's such a human reaction to compare our situation with other people's and be like, well, I shouldn't feel that bad, or I should feel worse. Guess what? You're going to feel however it is you feel.
And one of the best through lines of this whole podcast series to me has been that there's no wrong way to grieve, is one way to say it, or to go through whatever it is that you're going through. Because as individuals, we are a product of our circumstances, and however it happens. And you've brought this up with other guests too, which has really been a nice through line, and it's helped me listening to the other episodes and applying it to my own situation, that it's okay. That wasn't wrong the way that you handled it. You just handled it the best that you could.
Yeah. Do you think that that's what you got from sharing your story, is even more self-acceptance? Because I know after the fact you were like, I don't know if mine was such a shift, or I don't know if I did this right. And there was some self-doubt there, but overall, do you feel like the process helped?
Well, the doubt was that the title of the podcast is The Life Shift. And I felt after I recorded mine that I had a major thing happen, but it wasn't that big of a shift in my life as I elaborated on in the episode. Much different from yours, for example, Matt, and your similar circumstance. That really shifted everything. But I will say that the other thing that I got out of it was friends and family that have listened have messaged me and saying, I feel like I know you better. And that's really been a win for me. I had one of my closest friends from that era, when I was in middle school, whom I'm Facebook friends with, but I'm not close with, lives across the country, reached out to me, and that sparked a new conversation and a new renewal of that friendship. So I'm thankful for that.
Awesome. I see Adrienne might have extra notes. Did you add anything
I
to your
did.
list that you wanted to
Yeah.
share?
So, Kristen was talking about the trauma comparison. And I think one of the things that's important to mention is the concept of meta feelings and metacognition, right? And so that when you're an aware person and you start to become aware of your thoughts and feelings, and then you have thoughts and feelings about your thoughts and feelings, that can sometimes make it worse, right? And so that's one of the reasons why it's important to accept that all feelings are valid and to be wary of comparison, because it's not just the feelings and the thoughts that will get us, it's the way that we judge ourselves for having those thoughts and feelings.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. I need cheerleader pom-poms.
but also like, I mean, what Adrienne just said really, here we go, quoting Christin again, which she stole it from someone, I'm sure, is
I did.
the radical acceptance.
I just don't remember who.
Right. And I think it's a common through line, as Marty was talking about, is that everyone needs to be okay with wherever they are at whatever moment in time, and be okay with that, and not feel like I need to compare it to how someone else is right now, or like if today just sucks, then today just sucks, like, and you just lean into it, do whatever you need to do, and then carry on. Or at least that's what I've learned along the way, is that it's totally okay to not be okay. And I think society tells us like to not.
I was gonna say, can I give you like a tiny little like example of something that happened today that I almost lost my mind about? So our 5-year-old he's got the CDC recommended booster shots for COVID, and we had our kids in a trial. We are super pro vaccine people, so we took him to get his booster shot today, and we talked to him about it beforehand, and he was such a trooper. And it was like we had to go to a different person, not his pediatrician, to get his COVID booster. And he was brave all up until the second that they were about to give him a shot. Then he had a total flip out, and his daddy had to hold him and hold his arm, and they gave him a shot. And then he cried. And I had our youngest, so I'm distracting her. She hears her Bubba crying, so she wants to go. And I'm like, no, let's go look at this toy, whatever. And I can hear, our son, he's crying, Daddy, that hurt, whatever. And I can hear the doctor saying, do you want a lollipop? I'll bring you a lollipop, but you have to stop crying. I won't bring you a lollipop if you cry. And I'm like,
running,
fuming. And I can hear my husband like trying to very diplomatically be like, it's okay. He can feel his feelings. Go ahead and bring him the lollipop. And the doctor like goes back and gets the lollipop and brings it back. And then still he's like, is he crying? If he's crying, he doesn't get the lollipop. And I was like, you're going to give him the lollipop. Give him the lollipop.
Well, I think that's a case for, that's a case for kind of how society is. It's like, knock down these feelings. And I was going to say this.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I was going to say this earlier, and it's to that point, is I have to phrase this so I don't regret saying this now too, but I like having people like you, Marty, and a couple other of the men that I've had on the podcast sharing hard, potentially sad or devastating things, because society shows that like men aren't supposed to, right, be sad or have these emotions or go through struggles or whatever it may be. So part of me is like
inappropriate.
The ironic thing about that, Matt, is that my dad, who sometimes men get their mirror from their fathers if they grew up with one, my dad was the one to say it's okay to cry, and he was not that stereotypical macho role model in that way. Role model in many other ways, but not in that way. Whereas, as I mentioned in my episode, my mom happened to be more stoic. yes, she cried sometimes and whatnot, but the pushing emotion down or finding our emotional center came from my mom's side, from my mom, not from my dad. Um, so he wasn't the one after she passed to like help me or model the behavior of pushing anything down. Not at all. I don't know how it was for you, Matt, with living with your dad right after that. But
I just feel like throughout my life, well, through my grief process, once I got far enough, I became a sharer. And you guys all know this. I share a lot and I try to be as open as possible because I know I didn't have those models as a boy growing up, right? It was like emotions were quote unquote for girls, and that was kind of the 90s for you. Like the 80s and 90s was it felt like that in my world. I lived in Georgia, as a kid, and then in Florida. And so for me, I felt like I was really stepping out, sharing my vulnerability, not in my story because I'm used to doing that, but just anytime I would share something and people would be like, people would come to me behind the scenes and thank me, or I can't believe you shared that. That's great, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of where I was going with it, as I just feel like there are many more females reaching out to me asking, or talking about this podcast than there are men. And I appreciate that I'm able to have a handful of men on the podcast to also share vulnerability in their stories. So that's kind of where I was
one of
going
the
with that.
things that I noticed too,
Yeah.
that there were a
That's
lot
great.
of, I guess, skewed heavy on the women. And I wondered if that was just
Mhm.
because, women I guess are more comfortable talking about feelings, from a like societal or a cultural perspective, or if they
Yeah.
had like volunteered, or did you reach out to them? I mean, like, how did you come across the people that you started interviewing?
Yeah. And so, well, this is interesting too. So I mentioned that I have about 22 episodes recorded now, and I have a few more gentlemen on the call, and a lot of them are actually, all of them are people I know, until tomorrow's episode that I'm recording with someone that actually reached out to me to share their story, also a female. So I'm trying to not reach out and beg or ask people to be on the show. What I really want to happen is I want people to be kind of just like therapy in a way. Like, you have to be ready to do it. I want someone to be ready to share their story in the most authentic way that they can, because at the end of the day, I hope that recording, and you guys have kind of alluded to this, that by recording it, it helps the person, the guest, right, in a way of sharing their story, but also allows other people to feel connected to a community, to people that feel the same way. So I intentionally try not to actively seek out people and beg them to tell their story. The first few, as some of you know, the first few of the Life Shift podcast came about. This podcast came about in a class that I was taking in a graduate program, and so I needed to do a project, and I had a fair amount of you. I think all three of you volunteered to help in that project, which was really only to record 2 episodes, by the way. And so I feel like we're on a good pace right here. And I really appreciate that you guys
You
were
are an
willing to do it.
overachiever, Matt.
But look, people keep asking me, are we going to have seasons? I don't know. And really what I want to do is I want to ride the wave for as long as the wave lets me ride it. And so as long as I am able to find people that want to share their stories, the Life Shift podcast will continue. And I hope that's for as long as it needs to be, to help whoever needs to share their story and create that community. And so I think this is a good place to kind of call it for all the people that might still be listening live, which is super awesome. And I appreciate you guys. And I can kind of see the live chat. Nobody's really chatting because I put a note in there that I might not be able to see it. But we tested it out. We got it launched after
It worked.
6 minutes or so. And so what I'd like to do, I think it was successful. Do you guys feel like this was a good
nice.
conversation?
This is fun.
Absolutely.
Don't say no. We're live. And so
I don't know.
What I'd like to do moving forward is get collections of people that have recorded their episodes to come back and reflect on them. And so I appreciate the three of you being or helping me guinea pig this bonus episode idea. Any last remarks that any of you want to make before we close it up for the evening?
Out of curiosity, I did Google Radical Acceptance, and there was a book by that title that came out in 2003. The author is Tara Brach, Brach. There you go.
Nice.
Nice work. Little on-air research.
On the fly deep dive. Good job.
Yeah. Any last comments that you guys want to add?
Keep up the good work. You are doing good work.
I appreciate it.
So keep it up.
Thank you. Cool. All right.
Call your therapist or call a friend.
Yes.
That's all I have to say.
Find a therapist, call a friend. Anything from you, Adrienne?
Listen to your...
Any wise words?
Yeah, like learn to listen to that inner voice because, it's really difficult to differentiate sometimes like the trauma voice from the inner voice and to learn how to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of healing is learning to trust your intuition and learning to trust that you have everything you need inside of you to make the right decisions and to heal yourself. So,
right. Yeah. No, I think it's great. I thank you. If you are listening to this episode, if you could subscribe and review and rate the podcast, clearly that helps get exposure. Thank you for listening, and thank you guys for being a part of this. I appreciate you all so much. I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that change lives forever. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information about how you can support the Life Shift podcast, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. See you next time.